present the item. Chancellor?
Thank you, Chair Actenberg. The working on Category 2 student success fees was formed in response to questions from trustees, students, faculty senates, and the public in order to provide a history of campus-based mandatory Category 2 fees, success fees, the current policies and processes, and to make any such recommendations for the adoption of such fees in the future. As you recall, recently enacted legislation placed a moratorium until January 1st, 2016 on establishing additional student success fees on any other campuses pending our review. We're required to report to the state on or before February 1st on any related revisions to our fee policy. In the next slide, you will see the charge that came from Chair Monville, and I'm grateful that he recognized the need to explore this topic. I won't read these to you, but basically to review the process and history, the process by which people are informed, the accountability and outcomes, the impact and variations across the system, and particularly for students of varying racial, socioeconomic, and academic readiness data. This weighty charge was carried by Trustee Alexanian, herself a student at Cal State University Northridge, Trustee Fagan, President Armstrong, and President Garcia. I also participated in this work, and our efforts were supported by Lars Walton, Jessica Darren, Ron Vogel, Michelle Kiss, Rodney Rideau, and Justin Curtin, among others. The next slide, you will see that we did do 3 campus open fora held in late September at the Northridge, Sonoma, and Los Angeles campuses. And we also had feedback received well through October 14th, and we had a designated email address for input. So those that could make it to those open forum, they could also have a chance to reach us electronically. I'm going to turn it to Ron Vogel, who will give a brief summary of the findings from that input. Ron?
Thank you, Chancellor White. Based on the 5 key areas of the work group charge, we compiled and analyzed the information from open forums and online responses, which included comments from faculty, staff, students, alumni, and community members, resolutions from senates, feedback from executive committees, and recommendations. This material was presented to and reviewed by the trustee work group. Public comment and input received online was not cast in the numbers of those for or against Category 2 fees. The number of comments was not used to measure winners or losers. Instead, it was a thoughtful approach to hear and document all sides of the issue. In terms of history, 12 of the 23 campuses have enacted Category 2 success fees. Of those 12, 10 campuses used alternative consultation, 1 campus used student referendum, and the other used the student referendum only if students participated in an informed session. Under current policy, formal notification regarding campus discussions of Category 2 fees is presented to the Chancellor at the same time as a request for establishing new fees, and this occurs after the campus has gone through the process. The campus president submits a signed fee request to the Chancellor that provides a justification for the fee and a detailed statement of compliance with terms, conditions, and requirements of CSU fee policy. Formal notification to the Chancellor typically includes a detailed, I just said that. If this is absent, the System Budget Office requests information on consultation process for inclusion in the Chancellor's review prior to a decision regarding the implementation of the fee. Because the authority for regulating campus-based category fees is delegated to the Chancellor and campus presidents, the Board of Trustees is not formally notified at the time that these fees are established or adjusted. The Board may be informed of such report on system-wide campus-based mandatory fees. Also, as a result of open transparency rules governing the mandatory fee actions, the Board may become aware of campus discussions on Category 2 fees through a variety of communications, For example, public comment at meetings, campus newspapers, or the social media. The work group found that there was variation in the accountability and reporting processes across the 12 campuses with Category 2 fees. It was consistently reported that there was room for improvement on clarity, accountability, transparency, and reporting processes, especially and specifically with regard to how the fee revenues were generated, where they were invested, and the impact of these fees on student success. Additionally, the need for greater student involvement in the decision-making progress was expressed. Considering the sheer amount of information, the work group requested that a qualitative assessment be performed to organize responses into themes for and against student success fees. There were 5 overarching themes of those who were opposed to category fees. They included that present a significant financial burden that negatively impacts students, that it's another form of tuition, that it lacks transparency, and there's need for greater student input. It should be paid for by the state and hinders students' progress towards degree. There was also a considerable amount of support for the Category 2 fees. There were 5 broad themes noted and identified, and they enhance the total experience for students by improving and strengthening campus life and spirit, such as athletics, promote a quality education, for example, adding academic advising and support, and provide additional faculty, staff, and classes, increase technology and classroom equipment, such as labs, campus-wide Wi-Fi, and computers, and increases critical student services such as extended library hours, veteran centers, disabled student centers, and career centers. In reviewing the application of Category 2 mandatory fees, there is broad variation across the system, with fees ranging from $162 to $830 a year at full implementation. On average, student success fees represent 4% of the total tuition and campus-based mandatory fees, ranging from 2 to 9%. That was just discussed a moment ago. In the CSU, 57% of the students in the CSU do not pay tuition or Category 1 fees. And these same students typically receive over $3,000 for other mandatory fees, transportation, books, and living expenses. An increase in fees, however, increases the cost of attendance, which must be paid for from their financial aid package. Such a reduction for a few, as reforms, they are not able to continue with their education. It was also reported that the middle-class students who are just beyond the threshold of financial aid are also excessively burdened. However, the majority of the students who spoke in open comments stated that the benefits received from the fees, Category 2 fees, outweighed the costs, and they were willing to pay the additional fees. All of these findings represent broad consultation which served to inform the work group as they deliberated and developed their recommendations. Chancellor White, thank you very much for the opportunity to present the findings, and please continue.
Thank you, Associate Vice Chancellor Vogel. So what I plan to do next is briefly summarize the group's preliminary recommendations, and then ask each member of the work group to provide very short mind observations. And then following that, we will then enter into a discussion with the board writ large. To briefly summarize the group's preliminary recommendations, there is little evidence to support the repeal of existing Category 2 student success fees, or to suggest students would benefit from changing existing fees already implemented on campuses. Therefore, the work group recommends leaving existing campus fees alone and respecting the local control of those dollars. Nor is a sunsetting provision recommended. Such a provision would create an environment of perpetual uncertainty for programs that create opportunities for student success. For all future Category 2 student success fees, the working group recommends the requirement of a binding a vote of students to implement, 50% plus one. This is true to the spirit of students choosing to support their own education and to the principle of local control. And finally, campuses should continue their upfront efforts to inform and engage students, faculty, and staff. And campuses should also sustain a high level of involvement and transparency in ongoing allocation decisions and the impact of the invested dollars. The working group, while unanimously supportive, as you read in your materials, of the recommendations, did not reach consensus on the approval authority for Category 2 fees during our time. But subsequent to the work group's effort, Trustee Fagan has suggested a solution, one that I support, and he will raise this with us later. At this time, I'd like to turn to my colleagues on the work group to provide their thoughts. And I'll begin with Talar Alexanian, followed by President Garcia, Armstrong, Trustee Fagan, and then I'll share my personal observations. Trustee Alexanian.
Thank you, Chancellor White. After a thorough fact-finding process, analyzing each of the 12 campuses that have a student success fee already in place and hearing the comments from our 3 open forums, it was certainly enlightening to hear the opinions of all our system stakeholders and see the methods in which some campuses led a consultative, transparent process to enact a fee, and some who didn't, perhaps. And throughout my participation in the work group, I wanted to ensure that students would be at the forefront of the campus decision-making process, starting with the inception of a success fee, continuing with the allocation of the fee revenue, and ensuring the transparency of the process by working closely with campus administration. With the recommendations brought forward today, I could say that we're one step closer in ensuring that case. A thorough consultation process provides the campus and stakeholders with invaluable information about students' perspectives and needs. Coupled with students having the final binding vote, this hybrid system really elevates students in their rightful place as the most important stakeholders and will eliminate the lack of political efficacy that many students have expressed to us with respect to the fee proposal process. Also, initial involvement with the Chancellor will allow for proper oversight of our campus presidents and will mitigate any issues with the consultation process prior to it beginning on the campus. As a representative of the CSU students, it's important to meet students where they are, and our students are overwhelmingly in the online digital space. And by enhancing the online accountability process, individuals will have access to information that will allow them to be engaged, informed, and active in all parts of the fee process from proposal through implementation. Students are the most important stakeholders in this process and on their campuses, and they should have that voice that accurately represents that importance. The recommendations listed above will provide for a transparent, representative, and fair process that values students during every phase and allows for the individual campus cultures of our 23 campuses to be accurately reflected in the final fee proposals that are sent to the Chancellor. Just along with the recommendations presented today, I cannot stress the importance of continuing to advocate for increased state support and just making sure that the costs of our education are not shifting from the state to the individual student. And I look forward to hearing all the comments from my colleagues in terms of your input on the recommendations as well. Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate the work of my fellow members of the work group, and I also enjoyed visiting the other campuses and learn about the positive impact of the student success fees already implemented. I am also in agreement with the recommendations of our work group, and I'll speak about the process we use and will use into the future at Cal State Fullerton. As you heard earlier from our ASI president, Harpreet Bath, our process was inclusive and transparent and sought wide input. Our students, faculty, and staff were engaged in person and online in the Student Success Initiative conversation from November through March 2014. After weeks of consultation, the committee extended for an additional 2 weeks to ensure information and that their voices were heard. There were 153 live presentations provided by student leaders, 152,998 emails sent, 3,809 online and paper surveys were completed, the second highest turnout at Fullerton. Our average turnout for an ASI election over the last 10 years has been 1,953. Furthermore, an online portal was implemented. When all students logged in, they were forced to either read about the Student Success Initiative and take the survey or literally opt out of the information. This occurred for every student 3 times, and they could not move forward without making that decision. More than 30,000 individual students viewed the survey message 3 times. The first question on the survey was, I understand that Cal State Fullerton receives the lowest state funding per student among the 23 CSU campuses. We had 3,693 responses, and 52% agreed. The second question on the survey was, I am in favor of increasing student fees to support the Student Success Initiative. Of the 388 responses, 55% agreed. The students then proceeded to delineate in the survey where they would want the student success fee to be allocated. Based on the student feedback during the consultation process, the Student Success Initiative Committee revised their proposal down by $59. Example of some of these areas that students selected to support are being implemented this year. For example, expand academic advising to increase the number of advisors so that the wait time would be decreased. We at Fullerton need to improve our advisors from the 4,000 to 1 ratio to 750 to 1 ratio. The national standard is 600 to 1. We have already hired this semester 8 advisors and will hire an additional in spring. Furthermore, we are providing instructional software for students, Adobe Creative Cloud, Lydia.com, Microsoft Office. We're improving classroom technology upgrades, and another example is we're increasing library hours, especially during finals week, to make sure there's 24/7 library access. This would allow 110 additional hours of access for students each semester and expand Wi-Fi and net. Conversations about student success fee implementation is ongoing and it's campus-wide. The Student Success Initiative Advisory Committee, 7 of 12 are our students, is a new oversight committee that will meet twice each semester and already has met once. It is a subset of the Student Fee Advisory Committee that will also meet twice this semester to review all implementation plans and provide input and feedback to those individuals who are leading each initiative funded by the fee. The committee is co-chaired by the ASI President, Harpreet Bath, and the Vice President of Student Affairs, Dr. Johnson Ames. The Vice President of Administration and Finance serves as an advisor to the committee, and the ASI Executive Committee, as well as, are regularly updated. The Student Success Initiative is being implemented over 3 years. Year 1 plans have already been approved and are in process, with generally 1/3 of the promised improvements being delivered this year. A comprehensive marketing plan is being developed to include an annual report card that will be available online at Success. It will be updated yearly with both qualitative and quantitative data on results from initiatives supported by this program. Regular communication to the campus community on the progress of the initiatives by multiple means will ensure the campus community remains in the process. Our ASI President's motto, Your Success Student Fee at Work, will highlight how the student success fee is being utilized and how it is assisting students. I am proud of the work that has been done by the campus student leaders, faculty, and staff. It has reached out. It is transparent to the students we serve. Thank you.
Thank you, President Garcia. President Armstrong.
I also want to thank you for the opportunity. I also appreciate the thoughtful work of my colleagues on the working group. It was educational for me to visit other CSU campuses and learn how others view student success fees. I support our work group's preliminary recommendations. As you can ascertain from our students and faculty who spoke earlier, we welcome a student vote that is binding. The remaining discussion item is of critical importance to Cal Poly. We value student involvement. Let's not involve them partially, and let's not restrict their range of involvement. In deciding how to allocate student success fee revenue, our students understood that state support had been drastically cut and other sources, including general tuition, would not be adequate to support our learn-by-doing philosophy and our high-cost majors, engineering, architecture, and agriculture. As you have heard, the clear priority of the students was of lectures and labs, and thus hire faculty and other personnel. They understood that they were making a decision with long-term implications. One of the major reasons our students voted almost 60% in favor of the student success fee was the belief that additional faculty and thus additional class and lab sections would shorten their time to degree, as well as keep learn by doing alive and well. The decision for allocation of the student success fee occurred during the spring of 2012 by a committee that's majority dominated by students. The fees were first implemented fall of 2012. I'm pleased to report that in 2 years, our four-year graduation rate increased from 37 to 46%, while our five-year graduation rate increased from 63 to 73%. This is substantiated by a decrease in both the number of units taken and time to graduation when comparing 2014 to 2012 graduates. We believe the majority of this effect is due to increasing availability of lecture and lab sections. Consider the impact if a full-time student can graduate in 4 years instead of 5 or 5 instead of 6. That's 1 year less of paying tuition, campus fees, books, room and board, and one additional year. The results within just 2 years bodes well for the future. Decreasing the time to degree more than overcomes the added investment required by the student success fee. If we simply look at the decrease in time from degree from the 2012 to 2014 graduates, and then we project forward the total cost of a degree based on 2014, there's a 5,500 savings in total cost of attendance for the degree. This is significantly more than the amount that a student would have paid over the time to degree in the student success fee, $3,400. In addition, increasing the conditions for student success reduces the number of students that drop out. The worst possible outcome is for a student and or parents to make investments and not complete her or his degree. Collectively, increasing graduation rates and enhancing our faculty and student affairs related programs will result in more Cal Poly graduates to support California's effort to close the 1 million shortage of BS educated citizens. The bottom line is the state of California's return on investment and a big increase in that student and his or her return on their investment in a Cal Poly degree. We know from national surveys that the return on investment for degrees from Cal Poly is already at a high level. For Cal Poly, it's estimated to be during their career. It is not about rising costs, but smart investments. Let's continue to involve the students in these decisions. Closed, and as I have mentioned, students value our faculty. Engineering is a relevant example. Our state support and tuition are inadequate to provide quality, accredited engineering degrees within a reasonable time frame. Let me provide 2 examples of engineering faculty supported by the student success fee. Bridget Benson and Foed Cosmo's salaries are each covered 50% by student success fees. The other 50% of their respective salaries is covered by an endowment. This is an example of leveraging development success with student investment. Professor Benson's research interests span sensor, networks, underwater communication, many other areas. She uses the latest technology, including flipping the classroom. Foad believes there is enormous potential to use computer games as catalysts for teaching and expanding interdisciplinary learning. Both faculty members are some of the best teachers in the college, and exemplify the teacher-scholar method. Let me close by saying this about student success fees at Cal Poly. What we have in place is more than a process. It's a promise that we made to our students, a promise best evaluated, formed, confirmed, and implemented through shared leadership at the campus level with the Chancellor's oversight and guidelines provided by the Board of Trustees. This is a view that is shared by our ASI Board of Directors, our Academic Senate, and you heard earlier, 2/3 of the student ASI presidents in the CSU. Thank you.
Thank you, President Armstrong. Trustee Fay.
First, want to thank everyone on this committee, as everyone else has, but also Ron Vogel and Michelle Kiss, who worked very hard in doing all the real work of this thing. So thank you for your efforts, and also for Lars, who was involved but otherwise occupied a good portion in a good way. The charts have shown, and I'm afraid the implication that was incorrect, somewhat my fault, because there were no student binding referendum 12 campus. I was under the impression that 2 of them, but those also were student in effect advisory votes. Now, certainly the good faith behind those votes, in that the presidents had said they would abide by the results, certainly there. But the truth is that they were not there was no president to abide by that. So what we've seen are 12, all 12. None of those was a binding vote by the students. Also, I want to stipulate, there's no controversy, I think, about the benefits of increased funding for education. And all these student fees have been doing really good things. We've heard from the 2 presidents on the committee about all accomplishments of that. I don't think that's really too much of a controversy. That we all know the lack of funding and the need for improvement there, and this goes away towards that. So the good faith and good-heartedness of these is without question. There's no ulterior motive. There's no nastiness. It's all in one big effort that we're all involved in to try and make the educational experience for the students better, and that's a great goal. The problem, I think, comes down to who decides. And the problem that we came up with would be to change those fees from top-down direction of the chancellor to requiring a simple majority vote of the and defining the students who would normally be campus-wide general election for student body offices. So that is a huge, big difference. It ends the student fees as we know it has been, and creates a student-driven decision-making process. The vote that they would take would specify how much the fees would be and what exactly do. In addition, we didn't really, well, let me move on first. The other big thing we were talking about is we're recommending complete transparency in a very major way. And a number of campuses that have these fees in place already are doing a terrific job. And we've heard from Fullerton and from San Luis Obispo, Northridge. They make a real effort to have it all online, have it all there, and any questions that can have a conversation. It's terrific. And that's what we want to require all the campuses who have any of these fees to have. One other issue here is that the body of that would make recommendations, or rather decisions, on how the money is spent, if there is ability to make those decisions, would have a majority on that body, and only proposed would be allowed to be voted upon per academic year. So we're not going to get a flood of these things in the future. So those are all the things that we agreed on, and all that would apply to any new fee that would come up. The thing that the Chancellor referred to that we hadn't initially been able to resolve was the question of there are fees and there are fees. And what happens when a fee is doing things that would traditionally be covered by tuition? Is that an appropriate thing for a campus to decide? Obviously, some issues are, if the fee goes to hiring new faculty or advisors or doing classroom stuff. I think initially my concern was that the Board of Trustees makes decisions on tuition. That's where the decision-making process should be. And whether it's an individual campus or system-wide, the trustees should be involved. Also, we have this agreement with the governor about not increasing tuition. And if we are, in effect, increasing it on a campus, even though it's one campus, is that an appropriate thing to do? So we were unable to come to a conclusion on that at the time. But subsequently, I've had some individual discussions and thought about it, and not necessarily with board members, but with all appropriate discussions. And one idea that I think it solves my problem, at least, it makes me feel more comfortable, and hopefully it will all yours, is that if a student vote goes to approve these kinds of tuition appearing fees, it really brings up the question of if the people who want to be taxed agree to be taxed, are we really in a position to tell them they can't do that? I'm not sure that's appropriate. So at the same time, we should have some involvement at some level. So what I would propose is that the president and the chancellor have to sign off after the students vote for this thing, is that we require that the chancellor do so if he or she decides to do so, but do it in consultation with the chair of the Board of Trustees. The idea is then that if there's any red flags that the board chair would find, he or she could negotiate it with the chancellor, and if it really becomes a concern, then it's up to the board chair to bring it to us, and we can take a look at that. So I think that's not too controversial. Getting to the issue of sunsets, we agreed that per se, no automatic sunset clause, and in giving some thought to this, and a discussion with the board chair, the board chair's point to me was, and I think he's right, if the students can give us, if they give the okay, shouldn't they be allowed then to take it away if they want? It's a decision by the students. And I must say the whole big change in all this is that it's student driven, it's not top down. And so I would propose that we add into this, first of all, acknowledging in the policy that students in their vote, if they want, can include some kind of clause about sunset issues. We're not requiring it. It's up to them. But that would be an appropriate place if they wanted to include it in that vote. Second of all, that if the students can decide down the road that they want to rescind this kind of policy, and they approved it to begin with, then shouldn't they be in a position to be allowed to do so? I think that is right. But at the same time, I think it's also a concern that we need to have, once a fee goes into effect, we need to have a reasonable period of time to see how it works. One of the other concerns from some of the people who are advocating an automatic sunset clause is that should current students be making decisions that end up having a requirement on future students who had no say in the fee. So what I would propose is that any new fee would have to stay in effect for at least 6 years. I picked 6 years because, as we know, that seems to be the graduation rate standard these days. And the understanding then would be that there would be a generally whole new crop of students after 6 years who would address that issue on their own. Now, I'm not suggesting that we say there's an automatic vote at 6 years. It doesn't have to be a vote. There would only be a vote if there would be some uprising on the campus and a popular outrage at this thing. But these fees could obviously go on forever as long as the students supported it or weren't sufficiently unhappy to create a change. But they couldn't make a change for at least 6 years. And finally, the question is, what about the existing fees that have been in place? That, of course, is a much more difficult topic, and I'd like to throw out an idea. I'm not sure how it is received, but one idea would be to say that the existing campus success fees are grandfathered in, stay in, but after 6 years from now, students could decide to vote on a change on those issues. So those kinds of concepts are things I want to throw out there and maybe have a discussion, or maybe everybody thinks it's great and we can just go off to the next item.
Thank you, Trustee Fagan. So let me share just very briefly a few thoughts, and then we'll open it up for a broad board discussion. You know, indeed, back in the day, many of the things that these fees are supporting were paid for by the state and by the nominal tuition that was the case when I was a Cal State student back in the last millennium. $50, I think, Joe Castro, and you probably want to send me a dunning notice for what I should really have paid for my education. Same with Leroy at East Bay. I'd like us, however, to reframe the notion of this really as not so much tuition and state appropriation dollar, but really as a local control dollar. Local control, local choice in making investments for the future. The idea of local control is important. We have 23 campuses spread throughout the state, 772 miles, zip code to zip code, and almost 500 miles wide, with diverse climates, diverse opportunities, diverse economies, and differences among the student body and the businesses in those parts of the state. We cannot expect every campus to face identical needs nor opportunities, whereas these Category 2 fees provide an opportunity for a campus to invest in something meaningful to them, to the local campus community. They allow the campuses to act where they otherwise could not. They catalyze actions that the local community perceives as critical, but which are unfunded through any other. Consider this in a slightly different way as we frame this discussion. The California State University system, through the state of California, and through the tuition that is approved by the trustees, provides a base funding level for the institution. We can refer to state funding and tuition as the base that supports the bare essentials of academics and operations. Yet we know many opportunities exist in project-based learning, research, mentoring, support services, educational tools that enhance student success and add a margin of sophistication and excellence to the degrees that they earn. And campuses should be empowered to explore these opportunities. Now, this idea is hardly novel in California. As an analogy, consider the community colleges, who have long operated under a split funding model of a base of state and student funding, augmented by specially assessed local area taxes. These resources are again locally collected and invested in things that matter to that local area. Such models work because they rely on people in local communities to identify their highest priority needs and identify the best ways to achieve those needs through self-directed investments. We are now and always will be a single university, but that university is built on trust and recognition of a degree of independence and a degree of diversity among competing needs and opportunities. We must trust our campus communities to act when appropriate. And the recommendations that the working group has brought forward now have, for the first time, Chancellor approval a priori of the process that will lead to a student vote. And at the end of the game, presidential approval and Chancellor approval in consultation with the board chair before any future fees go into play. Thank you, and I think all members of the task force welcome your questions and your comments, and we'll be reporting back in January with any action items that come from our discussion today.
Are there comments? Trustee Stepanian.
I hope you'll indulge me. I actually have three of them. The first one is more of a need for some clarification. Trustee Fagan, you made the suggestion or the comment that the fees, new fees, would be for an indefinite period, but we should be considering having some sort of a 6-year review. I'm under the impression, I need to be corrected if I'm wrong, that under the legislative action that put a temporary suspension on these fees, that it's mandated that any new fee must be reapproved by the students every 5 years. I thought that was part of that particular law. We may need to explore that, because somewhere I got that in particular impression. You're not aware?
There was one characterization in there. I wasn't saying it would be a review every 6 years. It would be that the students could, at any time after 6 years, decide to have a new vote to rescind, but they couldn't do it before 6 years. But so that, you know, it's not nothing happens after 6 years unless the students wanted to, or 7 years, or 8 years, or 10 years. I don't know about that being in that law.
Yes, I think there might be a little confusion because one of the initial actions last year during the budget deliberations was that there would be a requirement for a 5-year, re-up of the fee. However, in the final version of the Budget Act, which is the binding piece of this, it just required that the chancellor review this and the board, do what you're doing now. But no, that was just a point in time, a requirement of one house of the legislature that ultimately wasn't included.
Actually, that's good news. Thank you for that clarification, because I was on the impression that at one point there was a statement to that effect. My next one is, during last week's Academic Senate of the CSU, during its plenary, I updated the faculty senators on the activities of this work group, its preliminary report, and I also solicited feedback. So this is faculty feedback from the statewide Academic Senate. The feedback I got basically can be categorized into 3 rather strong but conflicting statements, and that somewhat reflects even some of the things that you got in your particular report. A large number of the campuses with existing student success fees expressed very strong concerns about any policy changes that could impact the future collection of the existing fees. So they're thrilled with the idea that there's not going to be any sunsetting type of clause. But then a large number of campuses without existing student success fees expressed very strong opinions about the possibility of establishing some sort of a double standard because they'd be held to a different set of criteria than the people in the past. I didn't say that these are going to be compatible. Then we have that there was some faculty senates from a handful of campuses, some of these with existing fees, some of them without existing fees, that through resolutions, and I believe these resolutions have been forwarded to the working group, have expressed rather strongly that they are against any such fees that look and feel at all as if they are somehow supplemental tuition. These particular campuses feel that either the state should provide additional funds to cover these activities, or we need to be upfront and increase tuition flat out to everyone. I'm just reporting back what I got from the statewide Academic Senate. My last comment is more my personal feedback for this. And basically, I applaud the idea of having some sort of a student success fee. By the way, I attended all the forums and also listened to all the comments and that by all the students, faculty, and the staff at Durham. It was very, very exciting to hear all that particular feedback. And I also applaud the recommendations to strengthen the camping process for approving student success fees, including the fact of having the students having a formal referendum. I think that's a very excellent move to do. With regards, though, to the last suggestion, the remaining discussions that Trustee Fagan happened to mention here about, in a sense, the board getting involved in the approval of these fees, I'm opposed to that. Part of the whole idea of strengthening the process on the campus is to say the students should have a vote. That particular vote is then reviewed by the president and also reviewed by the chancellor. I don't think it's appropriate for us to get involved in campus affairs in this particular fashion, especially when it's not even something that's, in a sense, part of the overall financial budget for the CSU. It really is a campus issue. So that's my opinion. Thank you.
Just to clarify, the only time I was suggesting that the board be involved is if there is a fee that is proposed or voted on by the students that would be for a tuition type of items. And at that point, the only requirement for the board involvement is for the chair of the board to consult with the chancellor. No other board involvement would be ever needed if it weren't a tuition issue, and that's it. So I don't see any board involvement here, but maybe I'm missing something.
With regards to the issue of the possible use of these fees to actually support classroom activities, classroom instruction, rather than saying that that is something, again, that under certain circumstances may literally get involvement of the board, I think up front we need to have some sort of a discussion and make a decision that either it is included or it's not included.
Can you, I'm sorry, can you, I apologize, repeat that one more time?
Part of the concern that we have for some of these particular fees, and one of the, in the report under the remaining discussion items, it basically is the issue of what happens for these fees when they are used directly for classroom, supplemental classroom instruction to provide to hire additional instructors. And there is some controversy over whether or not such a thing should be allowed, and there's multiple opinions on both sides. I'm concerned about the idea of saying, well, there's always a possibility that the board is going to, in a sense, second guess at some level whether or not that's an appropriate use of money for a given campus. We either should decide up front as part of the overall policy to allow it or not allow it.
Here, here.
All right, Governor Newsom and then Trustee Day.
No, and I think that's a central point here, and this is why, from my humble perspective, this is simply a tuition increase by another name. And that doesn't mean I'm opposed to this. I saw that that was aligned with those opposing these student success fees. And that's where I'm frankly left a little wanting, and that's wanting oversight, because I think we have a fiduciary responsibility as a board to address that issue and not to abdicate that oversight and responsibility. As much as I appreciate autonomy and local control and accountability, I am very worried that we're going to see a system that will begin to fray between the haves and the have-nots, those that can absorb substantially more in success fees and those that certainly cannot. It seems a proposal not completely dissimilar to the one that was being offered by former leadership at the University of California, Berkeley, and current leadership at the University of Los Angeles at UCLA, that we're talking about pulling away from the rest of the system because they can attract higher tuition. They can attract a student body of a certain type that would absorb those tuition increases. And the system then becomes frayed. There's a disparity, the haves and the have-nots. And I think we're walking down that path. It seems interesting to me, and I may be wrong, and it's a question as much as a statement. I didn't hear any consideration of caps. I mean, we said, well, you can't do it more than once a year, but can you double it, triple it? Can you make it 50% of what the tuition is? That's not intended, but What stops a small cohort of selected students that are activist students that participate in making that determination to burdening the rest of the system with that student success fee? I worry about sunsetting only because once you establish new fixed costs that run in perpetuity, you're burdening not only the existing system, but the long-term budget. All those things, though, beg the question of, I think, from my perspective, not less, a little more oversight. I'm all for autonomy, but the accountability, I think, seems to rest here. And I appreciate the idea of Trustee Fagan to say, well, at least we should have somebody here on this board doing the oversight. But if we are going to have somebody, why not have all of us? I don't think it takes too much time to agendize this. If it makes sense, it makes sense. And the students want to lead it, we should have the ability to say, great idea, or why don't you go farther, or what's the accountability really look like? We talk a good game on transparency, but not everyone's probably going to do it exactly the same. I'd like to know a little bit more about what you're doing in a particular case. That seems the job of the trustees. I worry about giving that up. Look, this started in 08 for a reason. The state started to get out of the business of investing in higher education, and tuition became more and more problematic, and I understand the impetus. But I worry that as impressive as many of these reforms are, and I want to compliment everybody for taking this seriously, these increases happened on our watch. And I'm worried that they'll continue even with the new recommendations to happen, and to a degree where I'm frankly not comfortable, and I feel like I need to take some responsibility with more oversight. And I just would encourage us to consider about whether or not we want to completely give that up to the campuses, appreciating, Chancellor, this idea of local control.
Trustee Day.
Well, I'm pleased to hear that we're going to continue this discussion into January and early next year, because after reading the report and then hearing today's item, I've got a lot more to think about, as the Lieutenant Governor just elaborated, a number of other factors that need to seriously be considered. I was welcomed the opportunity to support the main recommendation, which is to require a vote, and I was surprised and shocked to hear that 10 of the 12, and now I hear 12 of the 12, didn't have a vote. And I think every student who testified earlier, whether they were students to support the fees or who opposed the fees, they all agreed on one thing, and that was that they wanted a vote. And so I associate myself wholeheartedly with that concept and that recommendation to ensure that whatever we end up doing, I hope that that's a strong policy statement of this board, that we will require a binding student vote. So I look forward to the future discussion and considering all those other factors at that time. But one question, as it relates to the board, the president's role and the chancellor's role, it kind of, and I'm not expressing a preference one way or the other, I'm just curious, we talk about students' voice and it cuts both ways. Does this process start with the students requesting it and the president and the chancellor have to approve, or can the students have a vote and then the president or the chancellor can deny, or it kind of goes both ways? So I could imagine a situation where students vote overwhelmingly for a fee, and then perhaps the president would say no. Or in the alternate, does it have to start with the president and then they take their vote? I'm just curious either how we do it now or how we're contemplating doing it in the future.
Chancellor?
Yes. I think it would be a shared decision by the students, driven by the students, working with their campus presidents and the senior administration to decide to create basically a prospectus for a fee. So they'd have to go through a process of saying, we want to do this, and these are the 5 things we want to support with this. This is how much we ought to be. So then they would have to go through, and how's the process going to go forward? And before they actually started the process, bring that through the president to me, so as a chancellorial overview that the process that the campus is about to engage comports with the new trustee policy on this matter. And the campus goes through its activities, which would have obviously a lot of sessions of informing students about what this is and what this isn't and how it would be paid for, et cetera. ultimately resulting in a vote of the eligible students. And that vote would press it up or press it down. So a campus may put things in there for IT or library hours. They may put things in there for academic support or academic offerings. Whatever the campus went through, as long as the process comported with our policy. At the end of the day, it would come back to the president, who may think, that, gosh, going from 0 to a big number is too much for this campus. I'm worried about, I'd like to have it as a ramp. So the president has to approve how that thing comes forward. And then they have to come to me, and I would also take a look to see if it made good sense relative to our policy and relative to the moment of time. But I would then consult in the proposition that Trustee Fagan has put, as I do with all significant decisions. You consult with the chair of the Board of Trustees on a lot of matters to keep that person informed, but also to see if they think it is appropriate as well. So I think it's leadership, shared governance issues that at the end of the day, before the fee gets put in place, that students are on board, that administration of the campus is on board, that the chancellor's office is on board, and the chair of the trustees is on board. And that seems to me to be a fairly comprehensive way to prevent any possible abuses going forward.
Trustee, may I make a couple of comments? Yeah, I want to comment on the what I would hope that we would avoid at all costs is a situation where a campus and a group of students vote to support a fee and then it's overturned. I actually walked into a campus in 2011 where that had occurred. Before I arrived, the students had voted on increasing an existing college-based fee, and that was overturned by the chancellor. And the negativity that caused with the students, our donors, our supporters, our alumni was tremendous. The other point that I want to make is a recommendation to sunset. I would suggest that occur at the time of the vote, because if you don't do it that way, you're in effect going to eliminate hiring any personnel. No responsible CFO on a campus is going to let people hire on a 5-year term and have that continuity. Now, we do it on grants and other things all the time. But the reality is that the tuition and the state support, it's not adequate. It's not adequate to cover what we're trying to do on the campuses, and the campuses are so different. I could talk about our goals to enhance diversity and how that's different from other campuses. But the other thing is about rescinding. We already have situations now where students make decisions and they commit other students. Recreation centers, student unions. It's really impractical to think about a student group rescinding a recreation center fee. And it also would be extremely unfair and impractical and very detrimental for students to vote to repeal our student success fee. We hired faculty because without that the students wouldn't have voted, and they voted. Now it wasn't binding, but they voted almost 60%. Thank you for allowing me to comment.
Chancellor?
Just real briefly to respond, Chair Attenberg, to Lieutenant Governor Newsom's question about haves and have-nots. I've been to campuses based on the percentage of students who receive grant aid, sort of as a proxy for wealth or poverty, low income. So we have 6 campuses where over 60% of the students receive grants, and we have 6 campuses where it's between 50 and 60%, 9 campuses between 40 and 50%, and 2 campuses where less than 40% of the students receive grant aid. So low income to high income across those 5 bins. In every case, 50% of the campuses in those bins have a student success fee, and 50% do not, with one exception, and that is in the 40 to 50% range, where there are 9 campuses, 56% have student success fees. So the have and have not point of view of our 12 that have that is across the economic spectrum of our student body.
On the other hand, the governor makes a good point. You don't want to reinforce economic stratification. You want to do something to address it. And that's why I feel better knowing that the students won't vote on anything until the chancellor has signed off. And I remember when Charlie agonized about that precise vote. And in my opinion, he made the right, given the process that was in place at the time, and given how large the increase the students wanted to vote upon themselves, and how disparate that would have made the campus as compared to all the other campuses, he made the right decision for the system. But what is extremely regrettable, as you point out, is it should never have, we should have had a better process in place whereby the chancellor makes a decision at the outset that it won't do harm to the, to the fabric of the whole, and therefore the students should be allowed to go forward and either vote it up or down. So I think that's an important point in terms of the health of the system. Governor.
Just a couple thoughts. I mean, I think, Jeffrey, are you suggesting that the current recommendations you don't support of allowing the chancellor to have oversight and veto, which is currently the recommendation of the work group?
I support the recommendations of the work group. My point was, and Trustee Achtenberg said it right, I'm not passing judgment on what I inherited. I want to avoid those types of situations. But if we don't build in the ability for students to make long-term, with the approval of the chancellor and the board and all that, then we will in effect eliminate hiring personnel.
No, I agree with that.
Yeah.
No, I completely agree with that. So a couple of thoughts. I mean, I guess I'm at a loss. I don't know what fees do that tuition doesn't do, except one major thing, and that is contribute back the tuition increase to the general student body in terms of financial aid. I assume there's no fees that we impose that go back to financial aid. It seems to me an important distinction, because the policy of tuition increases, or our policy here is an enlightened one, that we'll take the increase, every dollar increase, and we'll 33% of that goes back into financial aid as a policy principle that we have reinforced over and over again. Yet here we are allowing, with no cap, or at least to my knowledge, consideration of a cap, just local control and authority that's vested in one or two people, president and a chancellor, the ability to continue substantially in some cases, to the extent self-determination is truly afforded at the local level, substantial increases to the cost of the general student population without any consideration of that reinvestment in that increase back into financial aid. I offer that as a point of consideration and hopefully comment over the course of the next few months, because that's a very significant policy shift from one that's been long established by all of us here as trustees. And I also am still unsure as to why we won't be afforded the opportunity. What's the downside of allowing these enlightened bunch of folks the opportunity to say, great idea, or did you consider this? Meaning, why can't we come back to the Board of Trustees and consent calendar, or make it easy, I'm trying not to politicize it, and say, hey, we have the opportunity, not with a report that comes once a year, or someone forgot to even read it this year, maybe 2 years from now, or read something in social media that started all this and a couple editorials. Why not give us the opportunity to say, great idea or bad idea?
Governor, just a little bit of history. That, in fact, was the proposal that I had made at the committee, and there was just basic disagreement about it. And that was the one thing that we had been unable to come to conclusion on. And so, so the idea of the chair being involved with the chancellor is really a compromise to try to take into account other people's very reasoned objections.
Can I have a point of order? What's the process going forward here? I mean, there's a lot of ideas. How are we going to work through it? What's our schedule for the remainder of the day, given our agenda and the rest? just trying to get some guidance here in terms of how we're managing the issues and our schedule.
Yeah. What is the, what's that?
I'm not mistaken, we have a lot of speed.
Let me, I think you asked two different questions. Are you talking process move? Twofold. So process on this item is the staff working group is going to take all the feedback from the board. They're going to bring back an action item for the board's consideration in January in order to meet the statutory requirement for the legislature to give them a report from us in February. So that's the process for this item moving forward. One. Two, as it relates to this afternoon, as the governor and I were having a sidebar on, as it relates to the conference, unfortunately, I'm sad to report to my friends in the Academic Senate, we're going to likely run into the start of their conference. We still have a great deal of work to do. One particular report that I think is very, very important for this board to hear, and at some point I would like to give you a restroom break. With that in mind, I think given the number of public speakers we have, et cetera, I would say that assuming we make an expeditious wrap up to this item, you should conservatively plan on probably another hour and a half to 2 hours. I think is very realistic.
Are there any other comments that people feel compelled to make so that the committee will have them to consider? Oh yes, Trustee Eisen, of course. No.
I just have a very quick question on these success fees and how they're accounted for. Is there separate accounting? In other words, does each campus that has that have a set of books that tells us what came in and what it was spent on that could be at least reviewed by the board? I'm not sure we need to act on things, but I certainly would like to have information as to what's going on.
That's a good point.
Yes, there's the past intent is to make certain that there's a firewall between these dollars and that they are used for what they were purported to be used for, and they don't commingle with the general fund and can all of a sudden start doing other things. Going forward, one of the recommendations is to create a template, kind of a web page site where it's very clear on all the campuses and for the system, dollars in, how they're spent, and what the impact of that is. And so that'll be a living transparency and accountability issue going forward.
Student trustee, and then we're going to call this to a close and have sidebars with the governor, chancellor, all we want.
Thank you, Trustee Achtenberg. I just wanted to speak very quickly to the point that Governor Newsom made about concern with Board of Trustees oversight. Talar and I had the opportunity to present these recommendations to our CSSA colleagues at our monthly meeting. And overall, what we heard back from our students is that as long as there's a binding vote that really puts that spirit of shared governance and making sure that students are the most important stakeholders in this process, then that should be the end of the conversation. To allow the Board of Trustees, which does not hold a student majority, to change or modify a student-approved fee is contradictory to the idea that our students are the most important voice in the decision-making process. It's contradictory to the spirit of shared governance that we are mandating that our campus presidents adhere to during their student success fee process. And so Talar and I have been having some side conversations over here, and we actually really like Trustee Fagan's recommendation of the chancellor and the board chair being involved, because we think that that's a good mix of board involvement without taking away the political efficacy that the students have gained through these recommendations.
Thank you very much. A very potent presentation, both of you. Actually, very enlightening. Terrific. Thank you, colleagues. That, I believe, is a wrap.